Our protagonist, Claire Langford, is a seasoned journalist for an investigative podcast specializing in conspiracy theories and urban legends. She's skeptical, brave, and doesn't scare easily. One day, a tip comes in about bizarre events surrounding Trump Tower in Manhattan. Rumors of strange shadows, bizarre sounds, and even cases of people who went missing or left the tower changed, unable to recall what happened to them. Several sources report that some individuals who spent nights inside the tower have had their memories erased or became shells of their former selves, haunted by whispers in their ears and visions that only they could see. Skeptical but intrigued, Claire sees the story as a chance to debunk yet another urban legend. She pitches the idea to her editor, and after some persuasion, they secure permission for Claire and her crew to spend a night inside Trump Tower. They make arrangements to start their stay at 11 p.m. after the building is closed to the public. The story is simple. Spend the night, interview the security staff, and document any so-called supernatural occurrences. And welcome to Scarying YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe because I get motivated to make more scary and horror stories every day. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Arrival and Setup. Claire and her team, consisting of her cameraman Jake and audio technician Lila, arrive at Trump Tower close to midnight. The lobby is grand and eerily quiet, with gold accents gleaming under dimmed lights. The staff they meet are friendly, but visibly uncomfortable as they prep for closing time. One guard, an older man named Carl, warns Claire in a whisper, "People don't come here at night. You get what you're asking for." Ignoring his ominous tone, they enter the elevator and are escorted to the 47th floor. As the doors open, they're greeted by a strange chill and an odd humming sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Lila jokes that it's probably just the air conditioning, but Jake, usually the lighthearted one, doesn't laugh. The 47th floor is like a world unto itself, a maze of hallways covered in lavish mirrors that reflect each other endlessly, creating the illusion of infinite corridors. Claire notes how uncomfortable the mirrors make her feel, as if someone or something might be watching from within. As they set up their cameras and recorders, they realize their tech equipment keeps malfunctioning, with batteries draining unexpectedly and microphones picking up strange, low hums even when no one's speaking. They start to feel disoriented, as if the hallways subtly shift each time they turn. Claire assumes they're just tired and nervous and pushes the team to continue. Chapter 2. First Signs. Around 1 a.m., Claire and her team conduct interviews with the staff, recording their unsettling tales of whispering voices and shadowy figures in the mirrored halls. One security guard, when asked about his personal experiences, visibly shudders and says, "It's not the shadows you should worry about. It's the reflections. Sometimes, you don't recognize the face staring back." Feeling a chill, Claire brushes it off as superstition. But as the team explores the floor, they notice subtle changes. Rooms that seem to rearrange themselves, hallways that weren't there minutes before, and reflections that linger a beat too long after they've turned away. Claire catches glimpses of something in the mirrors. A tall, dark silhouette that resembles Donald Trump, but distorted like a twisted caricature with hollow eyes and a wide, unsettling grin. Suddenly, Jake's camera freezes and he fumbles with it, looking shaken. He says he felt someone breathing on his neck, but there was no one there. When he plays back the footage, they hear a faint whisper saying, "Leave now." Chapter 3. The Ghostly Encounter. Around 3 a.m., Claire finds herself drawn to the end of a long corridor lined with mirrors on both sides. She reaches the end and enters a grand conference room that seems out of place. Dusty and dimly lit, with large, heavy drapes and portraits of former presidents on the walls. But something about the portraits feels wrong. Their eyes seem to move, all focusing on the same shadowy corner of the room. She turns toward that corner, feeling the hairs on her neck rise as she spots a figure. It's a tall, looming shadow with features she recognizes. An eerie resemblance to Trump, but hollowed and distorted, with pale, piercing eyes that bore into her. He moves toward her with unnatural, jerking movements, speaking in a low, gravelly voice that echoes through the room. You came to see what you weren't meant to, it growls. You wanted to reveal the truth? It smirks, baring sharp, almost demonic teeth. The truth is, the tower has its own ambitions. Claire stumbles back, heart pounding, but the figure only watches, unfazed by her terror. Chapter 4. The Disappearance. Desperate to escape, Claire scrambles back down the hall, only to find Jake and Lila gone. She hears faint echoes of their voices calling her name, but when she turns, there's no one there. The mirrored halls have transformed, creating endless paths that stretch on forever, each reflection subtly different, showing a twisted version of reality. In one reflection, Claire sees herself standing with the Trump-like figure behind her, his hand on her shoulder. She turns, but there's only empty space. Frightened, Claire tries calling out to Jake and Lila. She follows the echoes of their voices deeper into the maze, but each turn brings her back to the same spot. Hours seem to pass, and she can feel herself becoming disoriented, her mind slipping as she begins to doubt what's real. Finally, she finds Jake staring blankly into a mirror, his face pale and eyes glazed. She grabs his shoulder, but he doesn't respond. In the reflection, she sees his lips moving, repeating one phrase over and over. The tower sees you. Chapter 5. The Realization. Just before dawn, Claire stumbles out of Trump Tower, dazed and unable to recall most of what happened. But as she catches her reflection in a shop window, she freezes. The eyes staring back at her aren't her own. They're dark, cold, and lifeless, like the figure she encountered in the tower. Over the following weeks, Claire becomes withdrawn, plagued by visions of the tower and that twisted figure. She tries to avoid mirrors, but everywhere she goes, she sees it lurking behind her in her reflection, watching, waiting. Her mind deteriorates, and she loses her job, her friends, and her sense of self. Epilogue. Years later, a young journalist stumbles upon Claire's story. Intrigued, she decides to investigate Trump Tower, ignoring warnings and rumors. In the final shot, the camera zooms out, showing Trump Tower's reflection in a darkened window. And as the figure of the new journalist enters, the faint, shadowy silhouette of Claire's reflection, alongside the twisted figure, smirks in the glass, ready to claim yet another soul. So, guys, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And comment, let me know that how stories scare you. Thank you for watching. The illusion of safety. The police never truly believed her. They told her to move on, that it was probably just her own paranoia, heightened by the trauma of the relationship. Her friends tried to reassure her, suggesting maybe she was reading too much into these coincidences. But the signs were always there, subtle, haunting reminders that he was still out there, lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting. The nights were the worst. Alone in her apartment, she'd sometimes wake up to strange sounds, a light creak, a faint tap, or a whispering wind that seemed to seep through the walls. She told herself it was just the natural sounds of the old building, but deep down, she sensed something more sinister. And welcome to Scariest YouTube channel. Please subscribe to my channel. I get motivated to make more scaring and horror stories every. Let's begin. Part 1. Beginnings and Shadows. It all started innocently enough. Elena was in her second year of college when she met Matthew. He was charming, intelligent, and completely different from anyone she had dated before. His confidence was intoxicating, and he always seemed to have his life perfectly together. Matthew's attention made her feel special, like the center of his universe. He showered her with affection, planned elaborate dates, and went out of his way to make her feel cherished. Her friends were thrilled for her. "You deserve a guy like him," they'd say, noting how devoted he seemed. And he was almost too devoted. Looking back, she could now see the red flags she had missed. The way he seemed to appear everywhere she went, the way he asked detailed questions about her day, and how he seemed to know things she never remembered telling him. But back then, she just brushed it off as attentiveness, as him being the perfect boyfriend. Part 2. Signs of Obsession. Over time, Matthew's behavior began to change, subtly at first. It started with small gestures, a text every few minutes, constant calls when she was out with friends, and frequent, unannounced visits. Once, during a weekend trip she had planned with her friends, Matthew showed up unexpectedly, insisting he was just missing her and couldn't bear to be apart. It seemed sweet, even romantic at the time, but her friends were a bit unnerved. "Isn't it a little much?" her friend Sarah asked her one night, concern written across her face. Elena brushed it off, assuring her it was just because Matthew loved her deeply. But then there were stranger incidents. One night, she found him standing outside her window, watching her. She screamed, startled, but he laughed it off, saying he just wanted to see her in her element. Another time, he called her and casually mentioned what she was wearing before she even answered the phone. She tried to laugh it off, but a sliver of unease crept into her heart. Part 3. The spiral begins. Elena's unease grew as their relationship deepened. She'd start to notice things moved around in her apartment when she wasn't there. A brush out of place, a drawer slightly ajar, or a door left open. Her friends told her she was overthinking it, that she was just stressed from school and her internship, and it was causing her to be forgetful. But deep down, she knew it was Matthew. Confronting him about it was impossible. Anytime she tried to bring up his strange behavior, he would deflect, making her feel guilty for doubting his love. "I'm just so in love with you," he would say, his eyes burning with intensity. "Can you really blame me for wanting to be close to you every second?" One night, she found a journal tucked away in her room that she'd never seen before. Inside were detailed entries about her life, written in Matthew's handwriting. Each page documented her daily routines, interactions, and even her thoughts on certain topics. It was as if he'd mapped out her entire life, down to the smallest detail. Every entry was accompanied by unsettling observations and musings about her behavior, even notes on how he could improve her by subtly manipulating situations. Part 4. The Dark Discovery. Terrified, Elena tried to confront him, but as she rehearsed her confrontation, a shiver ran down her spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that he would react unpredictably, maybe even violently. Instead, she decided to secretly investigate him. She searched his social media, his contacts, even reached out to his old friends. The more she uncovered, the more disturbing the pattern became. Matthew had a history of similar behavior with past girlfriends, though they all described it as him being overly attached or just really passionate. Each relationship ended mysteriously, with the girl moving away or cutting off contact completely. It was as though Matthew had a way of erasing his past relationships, leaving nothing but faint memories of intense and strange love. One of his ex-girlfriends, Claire, reluctantly agreed to talk. She told Elena that Matthew was like an addiction. "He makes you feel like he's the only person in the world who understands you. But then it starts to twist. He wants to control you. He doesn't want you to have a life outside of him," she whispered. "I left because I started feeling like I was losing myself. I wasn't even sure who I was anymore." Elena's heart pounded as she realized she wasn't just dealing with a clingy boyfriend. This was something much darker, an obsession rooted in control and possession. And she knew she had to get out fast. Part 5. The Breaking Point. That night, as she lay in bed, a noise startled her. It was faint, but distinct, the sound of her apartment door creaking open. Her pulse raced as she listened, every nerve in her body on edge. She reached for her phone to call the police, but then she heard his voice, barely a whisper, from the hallway. "Elena, I know you're awake." The fear paralyzed her. She lay as still as she could, hoping he would leave, but instead, she heard his footsteps approaching her room. Finally, summoning all her courage, she threw herself out of bed and ran. She made it to her front door, barely escaping, her heart racing as she sprinted into the night. She stayed with a friend, hoping the nightmare would end. But the next morning, there was a message from him on her phone. "You know I can't let you go. We belong together, Elena." Part 6. The Final Plan. Desperate, Elena decided to leave town. She moved to a different city, changed her phone number, and even found a new job. For a few months, it seemed to work. There was no sign of Matthew, no strange messages, and no unexplained encounters. She slowly started to believe she was free. But then, she received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a necklace he had given her years ago, along with a note. "You can run, but I'll always find you. Love, M." The nightmare was far from over. She tried to keep a low profile, hoping he would eventually lose interest. But soon, the incident started again. She'd find small gifts in her mailbox, catch glimpses of someone watching her from a distance, or receive calls from unknown numbers where no one would speak. The police tried to help, but without proof, there was little they could do. "It's all in your head," they'd say. These things happen, but Elena knew better. She was living with a ghost, a presence that loomed over her every day and night. Epilogue, a game without end. One evening, months after she thought she had finally evaded him, she found a letter tucked under her door. The handwriting was familiar, precise, and unmistakable. It read, "I've always loved you, Elena. You complete me, and I will always be with you, even if you can't see me. You can try to hide, but you'll never truly escape. I'll be in every shadow, every flickering light, every whisper of the night. Until the end, forever yours, M." From that day on, Elena knew that she would never be free. Matthew had imprinted himself into every part of her life, and his presence would haunt her, unseen and ever present, for as long as she lived. Some places are haunted by stories. Some are haunted by spirits. But this place is haunted by something much darker. What if I told you that everything you've ever feared about the Blackwood Asylum is real? Welcome to a journey you'll never forget, if you're lucky enough to survive it. And welcome back to Scarying YouTube channel on. Today, we're exploring the legendary Blackwood Mental Institute, an abandoned asylum with a history so twisted, it's said to be one of the most haunted places in the country. We've all heard the stories. Ghostly cries, shadows that move, people disappearing without a trace. But tonight, we're here to find out the truth. With my friends Derek and Becca, we're going to venture inside and film everything. If you're ready for a night of spine-chilling terror, stay with us. But beware, some things are better left forgotten. Before going, please subscribe. Let's begin. In the remote outskirts of Blackwood, where the skies stayed dark and the forests whispered secrets to the night, there lay the ruins of an abandoned asylum. The Blackwood Mental Institute, once a refuge for the insane, had been shuttered for decades, left to rot and fade into myth. Locals spoke of the asylum with hushed voices, recounting tales of haunting cries that drifted through the woods, of shadows that moved without light, and of something inhuman lurking within the crumbling walls. Tommy Jenkins had heard those stories all his life, tales meant to scare teenagers and keep curious children away. He didn't believe in ghosts, and he certainly didn't believe in monsters. But Tommy, now 23 and eager for adventure, found himself yearning to explore those old ruins. He was a skeptic, and he wanted proof that there was nothing to fear. Plus, he needed footage for his growing YouTube channel, Tommy Takes On. Haunted places always pulled in views. Armed with a backpack full of camera equipment, flashlights, and a pair of walkie-talkies, Tommy invited his closest friends, Derek and Becca, to join him. Derek, always the prankster, agreed enthusiastically, hoping to have a laugh at Tommy's expense. Becca, though wary, didn't want to be left out. As twilight descended, the three of them set out through the woods, the thick canopy above blotting out any hint of a star. The asylum loomed like a broken crown against the dying light. Vines crawled up the cracked brick walls, and shattered windows gazed down like the hollow eyes of a skull. The front doors had fallen from their hinges long ago, revealing an entrance swallowed by shadows. A sign, rusted and twisted, still bore the words Blackwood Mental Institute. "Are we really doing this?" Becca asked, her voice cracking slightly as she fiddled with her flashlight. She was brave, but the stories about the asylum had always unnerved her. Tommy nodded, grinning. "We're getting this all on camera. Don't worry, it's just an old building." Derek, already filming with his phone, let out an exaggerated, ghostly moan. "Beware mortals. The spirits of the asylum will get you. Becca punched his arm. Cut it out, Derek. Together, they stepped into the asylum. The air inside was musty and thick, carrying the scent of decay and abandonment. The entrance hall was wide, with a crumbling receptionist desk and shattered glass strewn across the floor. The fading murals on the walls depicted smiling doctors and playful patients, a facade of comfort that had long since been torn away. Tommy adjusted his camera, capturing everything while his friends followed behind. "Look at this place," Tommy whispered, awed by the history frozen in the ruins. "Think of all the stories these walls could tell." Unbeknownst to them, the walls did have stories, ones drenched in terror. They moved deeper into the asylum, their flashlights casting long, wavering beams. Every step echoed through the empty corridors. Peeling paint hung like skin from the ceiling, and old medical charts, yellowed with age, lay scattered like fallen leaves. As they turned a corner, a sudden noise, like a dragging, scraping sound, froze them in place. "What was that?" Becca whispered, clutching her flashlight with white-knuckled fear. Derek chuckled nervously. "Just some raccoon, probably." He tried to hide the tremor in his voice, but the darkness was oppressive, and every shadow seemed to shift and breathe. They pressed on more cautiously. They passed rooms filled with rusted beds and restraints, cabinets of twisted surgical instruments, and long-forgotten journals that spoke of treatments more akin to torture. Tommy filmed everything, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Then came the laughter, a childlike giggle that danced on the stale air. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Becca gasped, spinning around, but there was nothing. "Okay," she said, her voice cracking. "This isn't funny anymore." "I didn't do that," Derek insisted, looking genuinely terrified. Tommy shivered, a chill running down his spine. "Let's just keep going," he said, trying to sound confident. "We'll be fine." The trio ventured further into the asylum, coming to a grand staircase. The steps were cracked, and the banister was splintered, but it led to the second floor, where the most infamous wards had been. They had just started to ascend when Becca's flashlight began to flicker. She slapped it, frustration bubbling into fear. "Come on, not now." Suddenly, a low, mournful moan drifted up from below. It wasn't like Derek's joke from earlier. This was deeper, more resonant, and filled with an ancient, palpable sorrow. The air grew colder. Tommy turned his camera towards the source of the sound, but only saw shadows writhing along the walls. "Guys," Derek whispered, his voice barely audible, "I think we should get out of here." Tommy hesitated. He wanted to capture the truth, whatever it was, but something in that darkness felt alive, predatory. Before he could decide, Becca's flashlight went out completely, and she let out a strangled scream as something icy brushed against her neck. "Run!" Tommy shouted. They scrambled back down the stairs, Derek dropping his phone in the panic. It skittered across the floor, and as he bent to grab it, his face twisted with horror. "Tommy," he breathed, "look!" In the camera's viewfinder, Tommy saw them, pale, half-formed figures. Some were dressed in patient gowns, others in blood-stained uniforms, their expressions twisted in torment. They lingered just beyond the edges of light, growing more solid with every passing second. Becca sobbed, clutching Derek's arm. "We have to go. Now!" They fled, stumbling and tripping over debris, the asylum seeming to warp and twist around them. The corridors stretched impossibly long, and doors slammed shut on their own. Laughter, sobs, and screams filled the air, echoing from nowhere. Tommy's heart pounded as he struggled to keep filming, desperate to document their terror. They burst into the main hall, where the exit loomed like a salvation. But before they could reach it, the doors slammed shut with a deafening boom, trapping them inside. "What do you want from us?" Derek yelled, his voice cracking. The only response was a voice, a cold, disembodied whisper. "They hurt us. We want them to hurt too." The room grew colder, and frost spread across the shattered tiles. Shadows crawled up the walls, converging into a shape, a towering figure draped in darkness, its eyes glowing like embers. It pointed a skeletal finger at Tommy. "Record this," it hissed, its voice a death rattle. "Show them what they did to us." Tommy trembled, his camera slipping from his grasp. I didn't do anything," he stammered. But the entity did not care. It surged forward, and suddenly the world tilted and spun. Tommy was thrown into a vision, forced to witness the asylum's darkest moments. Patients writhing in agony, doctors performing cruel experiments, and the building itself groaning with centuries of suffering. When he snapped back to reality, the shadows were gone. Becca and Derek were sprawled on the ground, dazed but alive. The front doors had creaked open, and morning light spilled in, bathing the room in gold. Staggering to their feet, they fled, not stopping until they reached the safety of the road. Hearts pounding, bodies shaking, they vowed never to return. Later, when Tommy reviewed the footage, his stomach knotted. Most of the video was corrupted, static and dark shapes dancing across the screen. But in the few clear moments, he saw them. Ghostly faces watching, hands reaching, and that towering figure, whispering its curse into the lens. The video went viral, drawing millions of viewers. But Tommy knew the truth. The spirits of Blackwood Asylum were not done. They had found a new way to reach the world, spreading their curse one view at a time. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. But before you go, just remember, places like this don't just stay quiet forever. If you visit, you might be next. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe if you dare. And leave a comment about where we should explore next. Until then, stay safe.
There is a magic that lies buried in the forgotten corners of the world, an ancient power, forbidden and cursed, that whispers promises of limitless strength. But the price for wielding it is steep. This is the story of those who have dared to seek the forbidden knowledge and the dark path they walk. Welcome to Scariest YouTube channel. Before going to the story, please subscribe to my channel. I get motivated to make more scaring and horror stories. It is a story of the Chronicles of Shadows. Let's understand this in chapters. Let's begin.
Chapter 1. The Birth of Dark Magic. Before the rise of mortal civilizations, in the age when the gods themselves roamed the world freely, there was only one magic, ether. This pure form of magic was the lifeblood of the universe, woven into every living thing. The gods, known as the Celestials, were its keepers, ensuring the balance between creation and destruction. From the ether, they crafted the first sentient beings, the primordials, ancient creatures of immense power who could wield the magic in its raw form. For eons, the primordials ruled the world, shaping mountains, seas, and stars with their will. However, as time passed, they grew restless, and a rift began to form between them. Some believed the ether should be shared with the lesser beings that were beginning to emerge from the dust, humans. Others believed the ether was too powerful for these frail creatures. Among the dissenters was Dreamus, the strongest of the primordials, whose heart had become consumed by ambition. Dreamus saw the potential for a new kind of magic, one that could bend not just nature, but also the very fabric of life and death. This was the birth of dark magic. Unlike the ether, which was connected to life and creation, dark magic drew its power from destruction, corruption, and the void that existed before the universe was born. Dreamus began experimenting, twisting the ether into dark forms, creating creatures of shadow and flame, beings that could consume life and grow stronger from the death of others. When the Celestials discovered Dreamus's treachery, they were horrified. They decreed that dark magic was to be forbidden, and Dreamus was cast into the eternal abyss, a prison from which no one had ever returned. But it was too late. The seeds of dark magic had already been sown in the world, and though the gods had tried to suppress it, whispers of its power began to spread among mortals. Chapter 2. Malchir's Descent. Centuries passed, and the world of men grew. Empires rose and fell. Great sorcerers harnessed the magic of the ether, and the art of spellcasting flourished. It was during this time that Malchier, a young and talented mage from the city of Vardenfell, began his quest for knowledge. From a young age, Malchier showed a mastery over the elements that surpassed his peers. His brilliance attracted the attention of the Arcane Council, an elite group of wizards who governed the study of magic. But Malchier was unsatisfied. He craved the knowledge that was hidden from the masses, the ancient tomes, the forgotten spells, and above all, the mysteries of death and life. His hunger for power grew after he witnessed the death of his father, a great warrior who fell to a plague that no magic could cure. Malchier became obsessed with the idea that magic should be able to conquer death itself. One fateful night, as Malchier pored over an ancient manuscript in the council's library, he came across a passage that mentioned the Twilight Woods, a place long feared and forgotten. Legend said it was a gateway to other realms, where ancient powers lay dormant. With the manuscript as his guide, Malchier left Vardenfell under the cover of darkness, driven by an overwhelming desire to unlock the secrets of life and death. The Twilight Woods were everything the legends had warned of and more. Twisted trees loomed over him, their bark blackened and gnarled, as if scorched by an ancient fire. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and strange whispers echoed through the fog, as if the forest itself was alive. After days of wandering, Malchier found the heart of the forest, an ancient, rune-covered stone that pulsed with dark energy. The moment Malchier touched the stone, a surge of power coursed through his body, overwhelming his senses. The runes glowed bright, and the ground beneath him shifted. Voices, neither human nor divine, spoke to him in languages long forgotten. They promised him the power to conquer death, to control the very forces of existence itself. With trembling hands, Malchier invoked the spell that would forever change his fate. Chapter 3: The Rise of the Dark Mage. Upon returning to Vardenfell, it was clear that Malchier was no longer the man he had been. His once vibrant eyes now gleamed with a dark light, and his skin had taken on a sickly pallor. But the most significant change was the magic he wielded. No longer bound by the limitations of the ether, Malchier began performing feats that defied natural laws. He could summon storms with a mere thought, control the minds of others, and even reanimate the dead. At first, the Arcane Council was impressed by his newfound power, unaware of the dark origins of his magic. But as time passed, it became clear that Malchier's powers were not a gift. They were a curse. The more he used the dark magic, the more it consumed him. His spells became erratic and destructive. Crops withered in his presence, and animals fled at the sound of his voice. The dead that he had resurrected were not peaceful spirits, but twisted abominations, bound to his will. Soon, rumors of Malchier's dark magic began to spread beyond Vardenfell. Entire villages were razed to the ground by mysterious plagues, and those who ventured too close to the Twilight Woods disappeared without a trace. The Arcane Council, once his allies, now sought to imprison him. But it was too late. Malchier, now calling himself the Shadow Lord, had amassed an army of the undead and corrupted creatures, all bound to his dark will. The gods, once silent, now intervened. The Celestials sent their champions to stop him, but Malchier's power had grown far beyond anything they had ever faced. One by one, they fell, their divine light snuffed out by the dark magic that flowed through him. The land itself began to change, as the skies grew darker and the earth cracked beneath his feet. Chapter 4: The Shard of Light. In the midst of this chaos, a prophecy emerged, a prophecy that spoke of a weapon capable of sealing away the dark magic forever. It was the Shard of Light, a fragment of the ether itself, hidden away by the Celestials for a time when it would be most needed. But the shard could only be wielded by one pure of heart, untouched by the temptations of power. Enter Seraphine, the last champion of the Celestials, a humble priestess who had devoted her life to healing and peace. Seraphine was chosen by the gods to wield the shard. She was reluctant at first, believing that she was unworthy of such a task. But as the darkness spread, consuming more of the world. She knew she had no choice. Seraphine's journey to find the shard was long and perilous. She was guided by visions from the Celestials, but Malchir's influence was everywhere. The creatures of shadow that served him hunted her relentlessly, and the lands she traveled through were ravaged by his dark magic. But Seraphine's faith never wavered, and with each step, she grew stronger. At last, she found the shard, hidden in a temple deep within the mountains. The moment she touched it, she felt the warmth of the ether flow through her, filling her with hope. Armed with the shard of light, Seraphine set out to face Malchir. Before continue in the video, please subscribe. I like the video. Chapter 5. The final battle continued. Malchir, consumed by the dark magic, had become more monster than man. His once human features were twisted beyond recognition, his form a grotesque shadow of what he had once been. His voice, once filled with arrogance, had now turned into a guttural growl, echoing with the voices of the spirits trapped in his magic. "You are but a flicker of light in the endless void," Malchir taunted, his glowing red eyes locking on Seraphine. "I have consumed gods. What hope do you, a mere mortal, have?" But Seraphine stood firm, the shard of light radiating in her hands. Its pure energy cut through the oppressive darkness, pushing back the waves of dark magic that Malchir summoned against her. She could feel the presence of the Celestials with her, their divine power coursing through the shard, guiding her every movement. The ground beneath her feet trembled as the citadel crumbled around them, unable to withstand the clash of such immense power. Malchir unleashed his legions of undead upon her, the twisted creatures of shadow and bone rushing forward in a wave of death. But with a single gesture, Seraphine called upon the power of the shard, sending out a pulse of pure light that disintegrated the first wave of attackers. Their twisted forms dissolved into ash before they could even touch her. With a roar of fury, Malchir conjured a storm of black lightning, directing it towards Seraphine with a flick of his hand. The air crackled with malevolent energy, and for a moment, it seemed as though the darkness would consume her. But Seraphine stood her ground, raising the shard high above her head. Its light met the lightning head-on, absorbing the dark energy and sending it spiraling back toward Malchir. The dark mage was knocked back, his once mighty form staggering under the assault. "You cannot stop me," Malchir bellowed, his voice echoing through the crumbling halls. "I am eternal. I am the master of death." Seraphine felt the weight of his words, the despair that his dark magic carried. She could feel the temptation, the whispers of power that had driven so many to ruin. But unlike Malchir, she understood that true power came not from domination but from sacrifice. The Celestials had taught her that only by letting go of her fear and embracing the light could she overcome the darkness. In a final act of defiance, Malchir raised his arms to the heavens, summoning the full force of his dark magic. The skies above the citadel opened, revealing a swirling vortex of shadows that threatened to engulf the world. His twisted form began to glow with dark energy as he prepared to unleash a spell that would tear apart the very fabric of reality. But Seraphine knew that the time had come to end this. Gathering every last ounce of strength, she channeled the full power of the Shard of Light. The glow from the shard intensified, growing brighter and brighter until it was blinding. The air around her shimmered with divine energy, and for a moment, it seemed as though the very stars themselves were watching. With a cry, Seraphine unleashed the light. It shot forth from the shard in a brilliant beam, cutting through the dark vortex that Malchir had summoned. The light struck him with the force of 1,000 suns, burning away the dark magic that had consumed him. His body twisted in agony, the shadows peeling away like smoke. For the first time in centuries, Malchir's eyes reflected fear. "No," he screamed, his voice filled with desperation. "You cannot defeat me. I am eternal." But the light did not stop. It pierced through the very core of Malchir's being, severing his connection to the dark magic. His body disintegrated, crumbling to dust before Seraphine's eyes. The vortex above the citadel collapsed, the storm dissipating into nothingness as the last remnants of Malchir's power were erased from the world. All was silent. The undead army that had once obeyed Malchir collapsed into lifeless heaps, their dark magic dissipating along with their master. The twisted citadel began to crumble, its walls and towers falling in on themselves, unable to stand without the dark magic that had held them together. Seraphine, exhausted but victorious, stood amidst the ruins. The shard of light, now dimmed, rested in her hand, its purpose fulfilled. The land, once shrouded in darkness, began to heal. The sky above cleared, revealing the stars once more. The light had returned to the world. Chapter 6, The Aftermath. With Malchir's defeat, the curse of dark magic was lifted from the land. The dead no longer walked, and the twisted creatures he had created returned to the earth from which they had come. But the scars of his reign would take time to heal. The once great kingdom of Vardenfell was in ruins, its people scattered and broken. Seraphine, though victorious, felt the weight of what had been lost. The power of dark magic had claimed so many lives, and the world would never be the same. She returned to the temple where she had found the shard, laying it to rest once more in its sacred vault. The gods, silent for so long, blessed her for her bravery, but even they could not undo the damage that had been done. Though the shard of light was safely hidden away, the thread of dark magic was not completely gone. Its essence still lingered in the world, waiting for another to discover its secrets. There would always be those who sought power at any cost, those who would be tempted by the whispers of the shadows. And so, the tale of Malchir, the Shadow Lord, became a warning to all who would seek the forbidden knowledge of dark magic. It was a reminder that the pursuit of power, no matter how noble the cause, could lead to ruin. Epilogue: the shadows endure. Years passed, and the world began to rebuild. The legend of Seraphine and Malchir became a story told around campfires, a tale of bravery and sacrifice. But in the darkest corners of the world, where the light could not reach, the whispers of dark magic remained. In an ancient tomb, hidden deep beneath the earth, a lone figure stood before a cracked and weathered stone tablet. The runes that had once granted Malchir his power glowed faintly, as if calling out to those who dared to listen. The figure reached out, brushing their fingers against the stone, and the whispers grew louder. "The power of the shadows is never truly gone," the voice hissed. "It waits for those willing to pay the price." The figure smiled, their eyes glowing with a familiar dark light. And so, the cycle began again. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the darkness, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories of magic, mystery, and the unknown. Until next time, stay in the light.